Hi everyone, my name is Alice Soa. I am a process-driven designer, researcher, and maker based in Orove, where for the past year I've also been exploring innovative textile methods at the Icelandic Textile Center and researching different textile applications for invasive plants. I'm also a member of the US-based organization FiberShed's Bast Fiber Working Group, where we have been sharing and discussing different Bast Fiber research projects for over 2 years now. And so my idea for Plötumót's 2023 hackathon project proposal is to establish a bast fiber mini mill and natural dye house here in Iceland to provide greater access of the material potential for these invasive plant species. So you might be wondering what even a bast fiber is. Science Direct defines a bast fiber as a type of plant fiber that can be collected from the bast surrounding the stem of certain plants. So to break down what that means is that plants that have a very strong stalk usually have a woody structure, and on the outside of that is the fiber that can then be collected through different process methods to then use for textiles. Common examples of bast fiber plants grown for textile purposes are hemp, linen, jute, and raffia. Here in Iceland, we have 3 invasive plant species that fall under this bast fiber plant structure, that being the lupin, angelica, and dock. The structure of the bast plants is what gives it their long stems, like I mentioned earlier, and has the woody core that if you've ever cut through a lupin or angelica, you'll see it's hollow, and it's because of that woody cell structure that gives it its nice wind-resistant sort of characteristics. And then on the outside is a nice fibrous exterior. These plants also have great potential for extracting natural dyes from, in addition to a plant called cow parsley or French parsley, which isn't shown on this slide for natural dyes. And so I'll be walking through a pretty high-level overview of how the mill and the dye house would produce fibers and dyes from these invasive plants. A general overview of bast fibers follows these 4 steps after you do the planting and harvesting. Would then come retting, breaking, sketching, and hackling. Retting is the process of soaking the harvested plant and letting it rot essentially, or ret, to cause the fibrous exterior to separate from the woody core. From there it would go through breaking, where the weakened woody structure is cracked away from the fiber through like a hammering process. And this process also produces a lot of waste, which is called herds, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. And then after breaking comes sketching, where the remaining woody herd material is cleaned out by beating the fiber with a stick in a more hand-processed way, to then be hackled, which is like aggressively combing the fiber to then prepare it for either felting with or spinning. And the spinning will usually then be used for weaving, but can also be applied to knitting and also embroidery. Here is an awesome example of a researcher at Hallormstöðskólinn processing lupin in a modified process like I just talked about. Matilda Amalise has been doing this research since this January, and she has been very transparent with her process on Instagram. I'd recommend checking her out at Threads of the Arctic, and here you can see her process of retting, then having the retted fibers that are all separated. Then she hand spun with a drop spindle and then did some hand weaving here in this wooden sample. So going back to the waste from the herds or from the process I was talking about earlier, the only really textile fibrous part is the outside like I was talking about, but the inner core are what turns into herds. And as you can see in this top row, there's quite a different varieties depending on the fiber that you're using, and there are many potential uses for them as well. Most commonly, these herds with hemp are being used in hempcrete, which helps give more rigidity and sustainability to concrete. But there's also potential for using it as like a mulch or like garden cover in addition to paper. I'm personally going to be starting to research its potential as a substrate for growing mycelium. But most of this waste is also generated when processing the plant to spin the fiber. If you were to felt the bast fiber for grow mats or erosion blankets, the hurd could be more incorporated into the textile. Now to talk about some natural dye examples, my personal favorite, as I have the most experience in this area. Natural dyeing is an eco-friendly approach to dyeing natural textiles, that being cotton, linen, hemp, alpaca, yak, any type of natural fiber you can then natural dye with. Plastic fibers or synthetic fibers don't take natural dyeing as well, as they are not porous to accept these amazing pigments from nature. And natural dyes is a lot more of a sustainable method compared to chemical dyeing, as it doesn't contaminate waters and use any harsh chemicals at all. The process can be overviewed by gathering the plant material, working with it fresh or dried, brewing it like a tea, pre-treating the textile with a binder, and then dyeing it. Very high level overview, but that's just the general process. Here are examples from this past summer where I did tests with different parts of the lupin plant. This was being done while I was working at the textile center on their project Fjolleblauw, which I'll mention in a little bit, where we were using invasive plants for that project. But starting with the left image, you'll see 3 different colors, all from the lupin plant. The leftmost yellow one from the leaves on their own, and the green and more bluish green from different temperatures at which the lupins stalk with the flowers were prepared at. The lighter green was at a slightly warmer temperature, where the more bluish one was at a cooler temperature. And then the middle photo highlights the different pre-treatments and post-treatments of wool for dyeing with the lupins. So you can see different treatments lead to more blue, more green, and then treating it with iron, which shifts it to be more of a gray or saddens the color, just shows like the amazing potential from one plant of all the different colors you can get. And then going back to the research I was doing at the textile center, the top rows showcase on the left the lupin flowers being a little bit more of a green yellow, and then on the right I was able to get a bit more of an orange from the leaves. And then on the bottom is where I over dyed it with the bacteria dye I was researching there, which just shows the incredible potential of the whole rainbow of different colors you can get from natural dyes. And I'll stop there because I can go on to a very long rant about all the potentials of natural dyeing. But the purpose of the dye house would be to upscale the artisanal practice of natural dyeing, as there's only so much you can dye in a dye pot, and it limits the quantity and the amount of like textiles you can use. It's more accessible for yarn dyeing, where with fabric dyeing in a smaller pot you get fold or creases, which can impact, unless you're going for pattern, it can impact an overall dye surface. And so investing in like a small cone dyeing machine, which they have at the East Tex dye house in Ossusbar, would be really awesome for understanding how large of a scale natural dyes could go. So initial investment of the mill would go into building and preparing like hand power tools for further research of the invasive species bast fiber properties and for their textile potential. A lot of these tools have open source plans and instructions, so funding from the Plötumót award would support getting materials to build these tools and just having at it, crunching away at some lupin, angelica, and dock. Once proven successful with these hand tools, investment in like small scale machinery would be looked into with additional funding. You might be wondering, why invest in this machinery if the point is to mitigate the invasive plants in Iceland, so that they're really not a threat anymore. But after we've gotten a hand on managing these invasive plants with the inevitable climate change, there will be a warmer enough climate here so that we could grow linen like we used to, or like Icelanders used to when they first settled here in the earlier times. So in addition to hemp that's currently being grown and underutilized, linen hemp would be able to be processed at this mill. So we have the initial use for just the invasive plant species, but then also the other bast fibers that are here and could be grown here in Iceland. In addition to also other natural dye plants for dyeing in the dye mill or in the dye house. So the bast fiber mill and natural dye house will likely start in Fagerholmsmyri, where it would utilize the huge batch of lupins behind the farm up on the hill, in addition to Angelica and Dock that are always being pulled from the Skapafelt National Park. From there, the mini mill could be put on wheels, or so it could travel around Iceland or have multiple mills. The potential of this mill is still being figured out, but I'm getting ahead of myself right there. But overall, the bast fiber mini mill and natural dye house look to transform invasive plant species into accessible materials for construction